Welcome back. This is the Scaling Secrets podcast, and Brett Magpiong is here. And Brett is the founder of Rudius Strategies Group. They are a renowned expert in personal and professional development. And Brett has extensive experience coaching executives, entrepreneurs, and even professional athletes. He has helped people just like you achieve their goals and discover their true purpose. So we're going to talk today about an enlightening conversation on finding purpose, overcoming failure, and unlocking true wealth. So, Brett, great to meet you. Great to know you.
It's great to be on. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And I appreciate you too, making the time, coming on board. And so we gave a little bit of an introduction to you, but what are you all about? What is the elevator pitch, and what is your current passion and focus?
Yeah, you know what I'm all about is purpose, finding life's purpose. I spent 35 years in the wealth management business. I retired about 2 years ago, and I wrote a book a year ago, and it was released this year called The Delta Theorem. And it's all about finding purpose, learning from failure. How do we put ourselves in the best position to make a difference in people's lives? So that's what my life is all about right now in this last phase of my life, if you will.
Well, a last phase, but hopefully a long phase. And so you've learned from failure. And I understand the need to have like that constant supply of the motivation and learning. But sometimes I get a little stuck on sometimes I feel like I'm like getting the same thing over and over, or the same sort of like keywords and advice about failure and embrace failure and overcome fear and all that sort of stuff. But what helps me is hearing sort of the stories, right? Because every story is unique, but at the same time, it kind of gives you a mix of the old and the new lessons. So as far as your failure and what you've overcome, do you have like a top number one story to jump in here with, just to really give us an idea of what you're all about and what we need to know and do to get past these failures?
Yeah, sure. This is a very personal failure in nature. I was at the height of my career, and I was working up in San Francisco. My family lives down here in Los Angeles, and I was working in San Francisco, and I was traveling up and down the coast every single week. And one of these weekends, our firm had a happy hour, if you will, up in San Francisco on a Friday afternoon, and I had a little bit too much enjoyment of the happy hour, if you will. And when I went to get on the plane, the actual people would not let me on the plane. And my wife and daughter were waiting back in Los Angeles for me to land, and I never showed up. That was a major fear on my behalf. And I sat there and realized, the next morning that wow, this is something that, I have a daughter who I'm to character with, and my wife who's like, I'm all the way up in San Francisco. Does she trust me? And those kinds of things. I had to reevaluate exactly what I was all about at that point in time. Now, there are reasons why, I in this firm, and I was trying to, develop relationships with people, but, sometimes we can do those things and just don't work out. And that was a particular thing. What I had to do was I had to square up my failure, basically. And that's kind of a key concept inside the Delta Theorem. When you think about we usually see them as a negative, and this was certainly a negative in my life, no doubt about it. But when you square a negative in math, it turns into a positive. I don't know how it happens, but -2 times -2 equals +4. Doesn't make any sense to me at all, but that's the reality of it. And what I realized in my life was that when I could square up my failures, take something like I just did and recognize, wait a minute, I need to figure out how I can have a situation where I'm trying to lead a firm, I'm trying to develop relationships in that firm that are meaningful, I'm trying to develop all kinds of different aspects of that leadership, but I'm also have a family, and I have a daughter, and I have other aspects of things that I really wanted to do. I had to weigh out exactly what it was that was important in my life. And frankly, it was a trajectory for me, both inside the firm and as a father and a husband, that just led me to a different level in my life.
Wonderful. And so that gives an initial idea about this idea about embracing failure. And I love that square up concept, because in my head I'm thinking, man, not only is -2 times -2 4, but like -100 times -100 is like a plus. So it's the lesson I'm getting from you speaking about this is, sure, you don't want failures, but they are inevitable. They will come. And avoiding failure or avoiding your problems might even be worse, right? And sometimes it takes that failure to really get the wake up call and do what you need to do. And so, with sort of a little bit of those lessons in mind, like what should people be focusing on these days? Like, is there anything as far as these ideas of yours about squaring up and failure and personal greatness and all these things? Is there anything that's maybe like not discussed enough?
Well, I don't know if there's things that are not discussed enough. I don't know anything of that aspect of things. I do think that there are two options that people find themselves in. There's the option of looking at it from like guilt or shame, right? Like shame is something where you are bad. Guilt is you did something bad, right? Big difference. Shame will usually knock us backwards and keep us where we're at. Guilt is something that we have to deal with. Maybe I have to ask for forgiveness, which I did with both my wife and my daughter, right? And that was based on just, I was guilty. That's the reality of the situation. And if I would have lived with shame, or if any of us live with shame, guess what happens? We don't square up anything. It remains a negative in our life, right? I mean, that's just the reality of it. But the interesting thing about failure that I have found is that you never want to fail, well, then never take a risk. Risk and failure are tied in with each other, right? You never want to feel guilt or shame, never risk anything. But if you don't want to live, really live, like have an abundant life, then never take a risk, right? I mean, risk and having that thing that I call being truly alive is tied together. So, that's what I think about when I think about how do I look at these things? Shame, guilt, risk, failure, all those things tied in together to, propel us forward.
So tell me about your failures. That's always fun, right? We it's like that little incident, but about in your building your business and taking these risks and experiencing the failures. That's always fun, and that kind of encourages us to take those bigger, calculated risks and follow in your footsteps in a way. So what comes to mind as far as maybe your business risks and failures?
Yeah, there was one in particular that sticks out to me is that several years ago I had started a sports agency and up with a couple of buddies of mine. One was a lawyer, one was a former professional athlete. And so we had formed this firm, and we were representing soccer players here in the US. And one of the things that was unique about soccer, and is unique about soccer in the US, is that it's not just representation of players, but you can represent teams as well, or you can represent stadiums, or you can put on events. Well, we actually happened to put on an event in Chicago that was an international soccer match between a team from Mexico and a team from Poland, which was, believe it or not, for the demographic of Chicago, a really, really great demographic to put together. There's a lot of Mexican population in Chicago, and there's a huge Polish population in Chicago. So it lined up really nicely for us. The problem is it turned out to be a disaster because the timing of it wasn't very good. We just weren't really that well capitalized, and it just didn't work out. And it was a situation where when I went to Chicago and I realized that failure of that particular event, which was a financial debacle for me and the firm, I had to, at that point in time, realize that my dream of building this firm was not going to be a reality. Again, I had a wife, I had a daughter, I had some responsibilities from that standpoint. And flying home was like, I just this sense of loss. Yes, I took that risk and it was worth taking. Now, what happened was when I got back home and I realized, okay, now I got to recalibrate my career and figure out what I'm going to do here. I followed what I had done for the longest time, and that was representing people from a financial perspective, high net worth people and that kind of thing. And I got back in the business. And what I did was I said to myself, listen, burn the ships, okay? That dream of that particular business is over. And I needed to burn my ships. And that meant that if I was going to take an inbound call of another opportunity when I had just joined in with a firm that was probably a step back for me, I was not going to take calls because I was going to be fully focused on building what I had landed on right there. So that's where these things kind of come into play. And frankly, it was a launch, and that mindset was a launch for me to be highly successful in that new firm, and led to, a really great rest of the career. I mean, it was still about halfway through my career. And so I had a full half that was still, worked out and worked out quite well.
Wonderful. And I like your sort of healthy attitude here, right? How these things happen, but you don't regret, you don't regret taking the risk. You don't wish you can go back in time and change things. You just said, I'm on a path, and I do my best, and sometimes the timing of things don't work out, and I'm continuing forward on this path and kind of not looking back and not backsliding into these other past things. I'm now moving into what I'm doing next. And you mentioned earlier that you're on kind of this phase of your life and your career. And so, like, what is this final phase? What's that all about?
Yeah, as I was looking at just my life and my career, I had heard and I'd read this book called Halftime many years ago. And Halftime, the concept is there's like a football game and you have two halves to your life, right? And said, look, the first half of your life is about success, and the second half of your life, if you're really focused on it, can be about significance. And what he was proposing is, build up your career with the success side of stuff, but don't ever think that like you shouldn't give back on the second part of your career, right? That's the significance component of stuff. Not look at me, but like, what can I give back to people that I learned inside of my success, right? I actually have adapted that a little bit. I think our lives are more like hockey matches, which are 3 periods associated with them. The first period I see as study, and that's where we're just learning about, schooling and what have you. The second period of our life is about success, and the third period about significance. And so when I said that I'm in the last phase, I see this as the third period of my life. I'm a relatively young man here, and I do expect that this third period will last. I'm not, fatalistic around anything about that. In fact, I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of longevity in this area of significance. And significance for me is things like writing the book, taking the things that I had learned, taking some of the things that I'd learned from some of my very successful clients and describing those things inside of a book, doing podcasts, coaching people. This is about significance of like giving back. I don't want to go to my grave having carried some of these life lessons with me. I want to share these things with people so that they can learn from those things if they so choose to, or not. They can take the wheat and the chaff and throw out what they don't like, but at least I'm giving back in a way that I think will get forward, if you will. And so that's what that's all about.
I love that. And I love that idea of paying it forward, especially because like taking your lessons and secrets to the grave is sort of selfish if you think about it, right? Like
It really
is important to when you're on your way up to figure these things out, and then when the next generation comes in, or there's other people that can definitely shortcut or save a lot of unnecessary anguish and years and time wasted by learning some of your lessons, then you can kind of dispense some of those ideas and help out other people and give back and pay it forward, as you're saying. And so as far as in this book, is there a nugget to share with us on a podcast, or is there anything that's like kind of like if we heard about that, we'd like run to go get the book?
Yeah, well, the Delta Theorem is the title of the book, okay? And a lot of people are like, wait, what? What all about the Delta Theorem? That's kind of funky. Let me tell you what the Delta Theorem is. Here's what it looks like. It's actually a math equation, and it looks like this. Alpha over p cubed by EF squared equals delta. That's what it looks like if you were just to look at it. But here's what it means. Alpha is the first letter in the Greek alphabet. And in this framework, the Delta Theorem, alpha represents your powerful why, your reason for being, your primary first thing. I said that it's on top of p cubed because a foundation for anyone's powerful why is their priorities, their principles, and their passion. That when I sit down with somebody and I ask them, tell me what your purpose is, here's what I get. I have no idea. It's too big of a question. And by the way, if I tell you what it is, does it mean it could never change? I don't like that. So people don't really do the work around trying to explore what their purpose is, but it is so powerful to understand what you believe your why is. Instead, what I do is I say, tell me what your priorities are. Are you married? Do you have kids? Do you have a career? Those are all priority type things. Tell me what your principles are. What are the things that you absolutely stand for that are non-negotiables in your life? We all have them. They may have come from a religious, background. They may have come from cultural, but we have things that are non-negotiables in our life. And then I ask them, tell me what you're passionate about. What is the thing that just makes you fully come alive? When I tease those things out, what happens is that if you look at them as concentric circles and you find right in the middle where they intersect, that's where purpose is. That's where the alpha is. So all that is the first part of this kind of thing. But none of that is beyond just aspiration, meaning it all sounds good. I could tell you all these things, but if I don't do anything with it, nothing happens. And so by E for effort, that in fact our purpose is multiplied, is pushed forward by effort, doing something happen, figuring it out from that standpoint. What I also found was that all that is great, but failure is always looming around there, because when you put effort, you take risk. We've already discussed this. There's failure. And so it's F squared. And I talked about F squared before. Failure squared is the learning that comes from failure. So put that all together. Purpose, supercharged by effort, and the learning that comes from failure, that equals delta. And in math, delta is the symbol for change, for making a difference. So what I write about in the book is, listen, if you want to put yourself in the best position, not guaranteed position, but a really great best position to make a difference, have meaning in your life, then go through a process of learning what your purpose is by looking at your P cubed and supercharging it by effort, and then the learning that comes from failure, and you're going to be put in the best position to make a difference and have meaning in your life. That's what that's all about.
Amazing. And this is a fun concept, right? A nice idea of you take this kind of this idea it's really nebulous, it's really emotional and abstract and hard to answer, and just kind of breaking it down into smaller steps and making it into this fun mathematical equation. And so the part where you said, so if you're not sure about your purpose, you kind of backtrack and you say, well, what are your priorities first? And then that's kind of a straightforward enough question to answer, right? And you say like family or something, and then from your priorities, then you can figure out these principles. And if you hadn't figured out the priorities first, you might not even have had a good answer for those principles. And then that can then kind of distill down even further and figure out your passion, and then where those intersect, and then figuring out the other elements of the equation. That's like it can take this problem that, as you said, it's easy to have the writer's block. You say, I have no idea. Am I giving the wrong answer? Can that change? But then if you kind of can look at it in terms of those smaller factors, then it's like it's a kind of stronger result, right? Because it's more detailed, and you can kind of like show your work, like when you do a math problem, right? And see what steps led to the answer. And then if that does change, then you can say, well, these factors change, and it seems like something that can stick with us better, instead of being just like, oh, well, I thought of this, or it came out of nowhere. It's more deliberate. And so can you maybe, do you have like a fun like before and after story relating to this? Because like you said, the whole point is to go from success to significance, right? And so you're others, you're changing lives. Do you have like a case study as far as before and after of someone figuring this out with your help?
Yeah, sure. I've coached many people inside this, and one in particular is my client Paulo. I won't give his full name, but Paulo is somebody, and Paulo is in kind of mid-career, and he was trying to figure out, well, what do I do? He was in a decent sales position, but he just was kind of not sure what it was, whether he liked it there or what he wanted to do and that kind of thing. So we went through this process. I said, listen, let's talk about your priorities and stuff. And what we found out was that his priorities were things that had more to do with his family, right? He had 3 kids, a wife, and he wanted for sure to, make sure that his priorities were his family inside of things. Great. We put that on. And I said, tell me what your principles are. And his principles, had to do with he did like constant change was that he wanted to have. And he's also a very physical person, meaning that he does crucible type events and those kind of things. These were very important to him and have you. And then, we talked about what his passion was, and his passion had to do with, again, these crucible events and, these kinds of things and what have you. And so we pieced these things together and kind of looked at it. And what I asked him to do is I asked him to write basically his obituary. Like, tell me what you'd like written about you at your funeral. It's a hard thing to do, but it's really valuable. And he did. And principles and passion and priorities, he put those in there and kind of like, hey, well, let's those in there as like, these were the things that defined him. And what ended up showing up inside that was what he found to be really like his purpose. And his purpose is that he wanted to be seen at his, funeral as somebody who was both successful in his business career, but had raised up his family and his kids to a living, but also that they had character and they had grit inside of what they were doing, right? And so then from there, we just lined up things of like, okay, now that you've said that about yourself, what are you doing today to support that? It's kind of like taking your obituary and present valuing to today, using a financial term, right? Present value the future into today to figure out if what you're doing today in your investments at the risk level that you're willing to take is going to yield the return to be the person that you want to be when you're out there in the future. And from there, what he did was he recognized that this was a dead-end job for him personally, not because the opportunity wasn't there, but personally, and he did not feel fulfilled inside that. And so he put together his resume, and he applied to other places, and he ended up landing in a spot where he was overjoyed, believed that he, had put him in a place to where some of these things could be potentially come to fruition in the future. And, it was a great thing to go through with him inside there. Listen, I still, no, there's been failures in between. There's been, for him, effort is like, now he just started a brand new job. Talk about new effort, right? I mean, then he had to he couldn't just cruise along there. So these are the things that kind of come into play, but he's feeling much better about where he is in his life than just kind of like going through and trying to figure out, now where am I and that kind of thing. So yeah, it works. It literally works.
Well, I love it. And so the lessons I'm getting kind of from hearing your thinking and your process here is how helpful it is to look at your situation from different angles and using your imagination, which many times we think of our imagination as just like thinking things out of thin air, but we can use our sort of analytical mind and as part of our imagination. And so that's a fun exercise, right? To think, well, on the trajectory that you're on now, what would your obituary look like? Or what would you like your obituary to look like? And if those don't really, if the math doesn't add up, right? If the present equation doesn't equal that future equation, then what needs to change? And it just can help from getting that outside perspective, getting someone like you to help someone along with the answers, and just to get some of these simple questions asked and these things written down, which you and I both know it's easy for many people to not even think of these questions and not write them down and not have very good answers. And so we need to be kind of doing that hard mental work and get out. That way we can pursue excellence. And so, since this is the Scaling Secrets podcast, I want to make sure that we have a good tip or piece of advice from you as far as scaling a business, because you've had these catastrophic rise and falls, you've helped other people. So as far as this whole idea of our audience who's looking to scale a business to 7 or 8 figures, where do you think people are stuck these days, and what do you think is a way out?
I think that too many of us go it alone. Okay? We go it alone. And that's kind of the American culture, right? That independent-minded person. And while this may sound self-serving, it's not intended to be self-serving at all. All of the things I've just described is best done with somebody else, because we just don't know, right? We don't know. We don't know the clarification around things and that kind of stuff. So my advice for scaling excellence inside of, a business or your own personal life is get a coach, or get somebody that's a mentor, or somebody that's been there before, or, kind of open up your life to somebody else so that they can help you. There's not going to be a judgment inside of that kind of thing. It's going to be a refining. If there's a diamond down there, it gets refined through help of like knocking off some of the facets in that kind of stuff. And so I believe that scaling excellence inside here is about getting some help, using the knowledge of others and the wisdom of others to help you to make your own choices. And that's what it is ultimately at the end of the day. I mean, a great coach does not tell you what to do. A great coach lets you come up to your own aha moments. Ah, that's what I love. Ah, that's what my priorities are. Ah, that's what my purpose is, right? Those aha moments. But we just, in my own life, that when I went it alone, I didn't have anybody to kind of ask, what does that sound like? Does that sound right? And be able to help refine those kinds of things. So that's my advice to people.
I love that. And that's a repeat piece of advice that I hear on this podcast a lot. Not going it alone applies in all sorts of different ways, right? From building your team to having that coach and mentor. And I think it's powerful, and it's also an easy thing to overlook in a lot of ways, right? It's easy to let your ego to get the best of you, or it's easy for your low self-esteem or your negativity or self-doubt, self-sabotage, all these things to just misuse your imagination and say, oh, but if I went to this person and I explained my situation, I would be judged. Well, you're saying that now because you're trapped in your own thinking, and that's even a greater sign that you need to involve other people and not go it alone, and go there with your team and get this coach or mentor. And then so along those lines, people are watching and listening to this podcast because they are going it alone, right? But hungry for knowledge, they're hungry for some solutions to their problems, and they can use someone like you, whether it's your book or your company or your advice, to kind of unlock this greatness and get to the next level and scale and grow a business. So if someone wants to find out more about you and what you have going on and the book and everything else, then what is the offer and what's the website?
Yeah, the easiest way to get in touch with me is connectwithbrett.com. Literally, that's it. Connect with Brett with a 1T.com. And there you'll find all my offer, whether it's coaching, whether it's speaking, whether it's the book, all information associated with how you could get in touch with me, connect with me is all there. So that's the easiest and the best way to go about it. Love for them to get the book. It's on Amazon right now. You can get it in Kindle version. You can get the hard copy. It's all there for you. But those are the two things that are
wonderful. Connectwithbrett.com with 1T, and that's the hub to get to the correct path for you based on what you want. And Brett, things are easy to do, but they're also easy not to do. And if someone is listening to this podcast and maybe they're about to click or about to go to that website, but they say, oh, I have other obligations, I think it would help if we gave something to just really impress them or leave them with some kind of a lasting thought. So does anything come to mind to you as far as a quote or lesson that's really helped you in your career and your life that you want to pass on, so that way someone says, hey, this guy Brett, he does know what he's talking about. I'll go to his website right now. So what comes to mind as far as a quote or lesson?
Yeah, my favorite quote of all time that really changed the trajectory of my life was by a gentleman by the name of Howard Thurman. And he said this: don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive and do that. Because what the world needs is more people who are fully alive. Don't ask what the world needs.
I love it.
Ask what makes you come alive and do that. Because what the world needs is more people who are fully alive. I'll help people come fully alive. That's what I'm all about these days. And so, that's last bit of it.
Amazing. I love it. So to become fully alive, the next step for you is to go to connectwithbrett.com. We'll see you there. And thank you very much, Brett, for stopping up and stopping by and showing up and giving us some really great advice.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
There we go. So the recording is stopped.